2024 playoffs. Phillies, Houston, Milwaukee, the Yankees in Cleveland, the Padres and the Dodgers, Arizona, Baltimore, KC, Minnesota, Cubs, Seattle, Atlanta, Detroit, Boston, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Texas, the rest. Everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. I just figured today we would investigate a little bit of baseball as we return for our second week after the summer. And had been tightening up for a bit, but now, as the last week in the season, there's about 6-7 games left for the Major League Baseball season of 2024 before we begin a month-long journey into the baseball playoffs. And it always makes October so much fun as we go through a number of rounds to get to, of course, the World Series. And this year, prohibitive favorites. Probably you can't discount the Yankees, even though they got off to a hot start and have kind of cooled their jets and kind of played pretty much even with Baltimore for the whole season. Baltimore, of course, had a chance to really take control of the AL East, but the Yankees wouldn't give in. And so both those teams have been nip and tuck. They'll get next year probably more play from both Tampa Bay and Boston. Boston actually was a real surprise team this year. The Central Division, of course, you have Cleveland, and of course, Cleveland trying to redeem themselves, trying to get redemption for a couple of losses here in the latter stages of the 20th century in the World Series, but to get back to their winning ways in the World Series and actually, for their fans and for their franchise, capture their first World Series title since 1948. I mean, if you were born in 1948, or just think about this, if you were 10 years old in 1938, and this is not an indictment of anybody of that advanced age, but you're 62, you're 86 years old, and you still have not seen the Cleveland Indians win a World Series. You've seen them come close, of course, losing to the Braves and losing to, of course, the Chicago Cubs, who got their first World Series title. And that's the funny thing. The Cubs already eliminated. They haven't won in almost a decade now, 2016. It's amazing. It felt like just yesterday when the Cubs won that seventh game so dramatically over the Indians. I personally was rooting for the Indians. And now they got it. They got it done after Boston got it done. And in between that, the White Sox got it done. And you can see where the White Sox are now. They are chomping at the bit, hoping to be the worst baseball team in terms of losses in the history of the game. I just recently did an article on that. And the funny thing is, and I don't know, maybe it's my age advancement and all the rest of it, but that 62 Met team, I was hoping nobody would ever cross that threshold of 120 losses, even to 121, because there's something very, they have a myth all to themselves. You know, I had even mentioned it in a previous episode of Park Ridge Sports that that team was the embodiment of New York. They filled the vacuum left by the Dodgers and, of course, the Giants. And for those fans who just really did embrace that New York franchise from 1962 until on now, they were rewarded with a couple of championships. But even the Mets, now on the throes of getting to the playoffs, after, I tell you, I was not a believer in the Mets, especially after the putrid beginning that they had. And then everything came together. I guess they do give some credit to Grimace, but the Mets have come together, and it looks like they're going to secure not just their a postseason berth, but they're going to be probably the team responsible for keeping their arch nemesis in the National League East out, and that would be the Braves. They do meet them in a crucial series this week, but here are the Mets, and here, I tell you, age, boy, oh boy, advanced age really makes things. You realize this: the Mets have not won a World Series since 1986. 1986. Even the team they beat, the Red Sox, won a number of them in that time span. Mets. If you were born in 1987, you have still not seen them win a World Series. So you're talking about you are 36, 37 years old, and you have not seen the Mets win a World Series. Seattle, which is probably up there now, getting as a franchise, has never gotten to the World Series, let alone won a World Series. And of course, they are breaking down the doors to the postseason as we speak here. But I wanted to talk about a number of the other teams here, not just those teams that I pointed out. And of course, here's what you have to do. You got to go back to the days of, ready for this, Lou Boudreau, who was the player manager of the 1948 Indians when they last captured their World Series. Boudreau was not uncommon to be a player manager, but as we have gone on, and of course the great Bill James and his great research books have mentioned, it's awful tough being a player manager today. I guess there have been a couple, Pete Rose that I can think of, Frank Robinson. It doesn't really last forever. In fact, the player manager, that name, usually they end it and just become a full-time manager. Pete Rose, I guess, as I'm thinking, was the last player manager for the Cincinnati Reds. But Boudreau that year, that Indian team won 97 games, not only had to win a close pennant race, but they had to beat the Red Sox in a regular season, but we call it a playoff game, at the end of the season. So they actually played 155 games instead of 154. Actually handily, the Boston Red Sox 8-3 in that playoff type game. And again, it was seen as game 162 in the regular season, but they beat them. And here is the deal with that 48 Indian team. They never really were below third place in the American League that year. They actually fell from grace, going all the way down. They were up in first place, half game, 1.5 games, 1.5. They were actually up half a game on Thursday, July 2nd, and then all of a sudden fell to third place on July 24th when they lost both ends of a doubleheader to the Red Sox and actually were in the midst of a 4-game losing streak, a 6 of 7 game losing streak, a 6 of 7 they lost 2, 4, 6, 7 they went 2-7 rather, 2-8, 8 of 10 they lost on Friday, July 30th before they won a walk-off game against Boston to get back to within 2 games of first place Red Sox, winning that game 10-9. And then they bounced back between first and second with the Red Sox for the rest of the summer, from August all the way into September. They fell in September to third place. Ready for this? They actually fell 4.5 games back of first place on September 9th. And actually, ready for this, won not 1, not 2, but 7 straight, including 2 walk-off wins. And then they won 8 of 9 with 3 walk-off wins to get them really back into the race. They cut the lead on Monday, September 20th. They were trailing the Red Sox by half a game. Then they tied them September 22nd, the 24th. They tied on September 25th, where they maintained that. They were just phenomenal. From September 16th, they won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of 12 to go up by 2. Then they faded again. Finally, were tied by the Red Sox and then won the game in Fenway Park 8-3. Now, why do I say all that? And I thought it was kind of exciting. That'll never happen again because now with teams making the postseason, multiple teams making the postseason, that thrill, that risk, that whole sense of tightness that comes with pennant race is kind of lost with the advent of more teams in the playoffs. But just taking a look at that 48 team, Lou Boudreau, all right, was 97 and 58. Here's what Boudreau did that year as a player manager. He played all 152 of the 155 games. He had 18 homers, 34 doubles, 106 RBIs, and batted .355 to lead all regulars on the Cleveland Indians. Let me just get Boudreau up here because this is kind of crazy that I'm not showing him. And, of course, that's Lou Burdett, who had one time, the Braves, of course, were in Boston. And they were actually the team that they beat, the Boston Braves, when Cleveland won their last title. But here are some of the guys. You had Jim Hegan as your catcher. Mike Hegan was his son, who would later play for the Seattle Pilots and the Yankees, and also World Championship teams in Oakland. He was 1461, 248. Eddie Robinson, their first baseman, 1683, 254. Joe Gordon, 32 homers, 124 RBIs, a really good player, hit 280. Lou Boudreau, as I said, 18106, 355. Boudreau also led the regulars in doubles with 34 doubles and had 6 triples to be tied for third on the team. Ready for this? Kenny Keltner. And, of course, many Yankee fans know who Kenny Keltner. Probably, I'll tell you the truth, he probably could have won the MVP. 31, 119, 297. And I know he was a great defensive third baseman. Larry Doby, the first African-American in the American League, 1466, 301 at the age of 24. And they had an outfielder by the name of Dale Mitchell. They had Thurman Tucker, who was their other outfielder on that team, age 30. 1 homer, 19 RBIs, hit 260. Played only 83 games as he shared duties with Allie Clark, who had 9, 38, and 310. But it was Dale Mitchell I wanted to focus on. 4 homers, 56 RBIs, played 141 games, hit 336, and scored 82 runs for that Cleveland team. And, of course, you Brooklyn fans and you Yankee fans know he was the last out in Larson's perfect game. That team would go on and defeat the Boston Braves in 6 games in 1948. Now, I decided to put both the Braves and the Brewers together because at one time, of course, the Atlanta Braves did make Milwaukee their home. And, of course, they won 2 pennants in a World Series while staying and playing in County Stadium. And County Stadium, of course, hosted or was the home for the Milwaukee Brewers when, quote unquote, they moved from Seattle or, that Seattle franchise, technically, I guess, from an IRS / business sense, they went out of business, and then Milwaukee basically purchased equipment and players, moved the franchise, or Bud Selig did, to Milwaukee for the 1970 season. Took them 12 years or 13 seasons to get to the World Series, but they were led by future Hall of Famer, 2-time MVP, Robin Yount. All right, and kind of interesting, that Boston Braves team, let me just go back to them because Lou Boudreau was a real star for those great Braves teams, along with Warren Spahn. Warren Spahn was just an unbelievable player. Just an unbelievable player. But I just wanted to focus on that Milwaukee team, 1957. That team, ready for this? That 1957 team was composed of Del Crandall, who wouldn't manage. Never thought much of him as a manager and never realized he was a really good player. Known as a great defensive player, Del Crandall, I guess he was saddled with mediocre teams. And maybe kind of like Joe Torre, had he been given a better team with better prospects, who knows? Maybe Crandall could have been the Joe Torre of, let's say, the 60s. I'm not saying he had terrible teams with the Braves, but nonetheless, that team, those Braves of the 60s, kind of had their run. Some of the players had to kind of get younger because that Braves team was composed of many guys in their prime that had moved from Milwaukee to Atlanta prior to the 66 season. But ready for that 57 team? You had Burdett and Warren Spahn, who together were 38 and 20. Bob Buell won 18 games as their third starter. And Gene Conley, and of course, I've talked about, I think, Gene Conley. One of his good friends on the Red Sox was Pumpsy Green, Elijah Pumpsy Green, who was the first African-American player to wear the uniform of the Red Sox. But he and Conley were buddies while with the Red Sox. And I think this is from this baseball book I've read. Apparently they got on a flight and flew to Israel from New York one day, just on a lark. And so Conley, who did play basketball, I think he played with the Celtics, not a bad pitcher, made the All-Star team. He was the fourth guy on that in that Brave rotation. But Spahn was the star. Burdette won 17 games. And why I like to talk about Burdette is that, Burdette, I was really amazed at this. He's 203 and 144, 59 games over 500, decent ERA, 366. And his WAR, 28.6, is kind of low to me. Burdette won, ready for this, from 1953 until 1961. Not only did he have winning records, not only did he have double-digit records, but he was 15-5, 15-14, 13-8, 19-10, 17-9, 20-10, 21-15, 19-13, and 18-11. He led the league in 1958 with a winning percentage of .667. In 1956, he led the league in ERA with 2.70 ERA with 6 shutouts. In 1959, he won 21 games with an ERA of 4. He started 39 games to lead the league, finished 20 of them, had 4 shutouts and a save. And probably, to be fair to him, his ERA was so high because it was also the highest number of innings he threw in a season, 289. This, after throwing 256, 275, then the 289, then 275, 272 over 5 years in the major leagues. And over that time, in those 5 years, 36, 56, 77, he won 96 games and only lost 57 games for the Milwaukee Braves. Now, ZRA was never higher in those 5 years than 372. Okay, still not bad, not the best, but and you have to see it in context of the times. Probably high, still won 17 games and finished 14 of them, 14 complete games. I don't think there's a pitching staff in the major leagues today that has 14 complete games, let alone one pitcher. It's a good, solid pitcher. Yeah, he did give up a lot of hits. From 1959 to 61, he gave up 312, 277, and 295, which was the leader. Gave up the most earned runs, 131 and 121 in 59 and 1961, and the most home runs in 59. That was the year, of course, that he had the high ERA of 4.7, but managed to win 20 games, 21, with a 583 winning percentage. That's 90-some-odd ball games that if you had a guy and if your team played at a 21-15 clip, I think they win, let's say, 94, 95 games today. That would put him in the playoffs. Good pitcher. Like I said, I would love to know why his WAR is so low. It is. He had a 3.66 ERA and 32 saves in his career to go with his 203 wins and 59 games over 500. His winning percentage is .585. We got guys in Hall of Fame. Yes, they won 300 games, but their winning percentage in some cases isn't even in the 520s. Here's Burdette, .585. Okay? And if you thought that he pitched just with Milwaukee, he is traded to St. Louis, has a year or two with Chicago, goes to Philly, ends up with the expansion California Angels, and actually goes 8-2 over his last 2 years in the league. 18-year career for Lou Burdette. Let's move on to another team here. I'll talk a little bit about Yount. That team, that was actually a pretty good series. A lot of hitting. That Yount team from start to finish was just loaded. Yount hit 29 home runs. He had a ton of doubles. hit 329, was a shortstop, was the MVP, would move to center field, become an MVP as well there. That Milwaukee team, of course, lost in 7 games. In fact, I think they had a 3-2 game lead over the Cardinals and Whitey Herzog, and before losing to the Brewers. I love this uniform of the Brewers, by the way. That 82 team consisted of, ready for this, Ted Salmons, Hall of Famer, Cecil Cooper, who had a monster year, 38 doubles, 32 homers, 121 RBIs, hit 313. Jimmy Gatner, who is a really good player, solid, played 132 games there at second base, hit 294, and he had 48 runs scored and 43 RBIs. Robin Yount was the big star. I thought he had 46 doubles for Yount that year, 29 home runs, 12 triples, 114 runs, 129 RBIs, hit 331 with 54 walks. Solid year. Solid Hall of Fame year. Paul Molitor was on that team, 1971, 302. Molitor's a great hitter. Molitor and guys like Pete Rose, and even with the Yankees, LeMahieu. I love those types of players because they can play anywhere. And to this day, I still don't understand why baseball teams don't develop, especially in this modern age where you got all the defensive metrics and stuff. Just put a player, let him play all 7 positions on a regular basis, and give guys a break as maybe a DH or just the night off. And by developing that guy who can play 6 different positions and do them well, got him doing well. Now, arguably, Rose couldn't play center field. I get that. He did come up as a second baseman. And he did play the 2 corner positions in both the infield and the outfield. And he did come up as a second baseman. And he did make the All-Star team. Yes, I know, probably on his popularity more than, let's say, his defensive prowess. But did make the starting spot in 5 different positions. He can't be all that bad. Because after a while, you can't hide a bad glove. Now put him in 5 different positions. And anybody who knows Rose, you remember the 1980, the Phillies' first championship, he made a big play in that Game 6 where he caught the foul ball that was that fell off the glove or out of the glove of Bob Boone in foul territory. It was a big play because if the Phillies dropped that ball, you can just see history being rewritten. And now that foul ball drop turns into, let's say, almost like the Bart foul ball in Chicago versus Miami way back when. Anyway, Yount had a fantastic season in 1982, and the Brewers fell a little bit short, losing in 7. And they really, when you think about it, haven't been back since. This year could end that for them. Solid team again. They've been really the team in the last 6-7 years. I know that the Cardinals, and I'm disappointed in the Cardinals because the Cardinals are just not, they disappointed me this year. Anybody who knows me, I'm always picking the Cardinals for at least a wild card. They just have the pedigree like the Yankees do in the National League. More so than the Dodgers because they've got more World Series championships than the Dodgers. And they've done it for just as long, if not longer, than the Dodgers, okay? Here's Dan Gladden, Minnesota. Can't believe this. It's over 30 years ago that Minnesota won not their first, but their second title in 4 years, beating the Cardinals in their first one in 87 in the Homer Dome, and then defeating the Atlanta Braves in 1991 in that great, great game. And let me just get that. And it was Gladden who scored the winning run, 1-0 in that game. And, this was a Minnesota Twin in 82. They were in last place, 60-102. And I'm just giving you, any of these names sound familiar? Ken Herbeck, Gary Gaetti, Tom Bruansky, Frank Viola. Those players were all part of their first championship. And I'm pretty sure most, if not all, were part of their second championship team. Ready for this? There's Herbeck. They would have Chuck Knobloch, who hit 281 that year. Didn't have the yips at second base. Played solid second. Gary Gagne was their shortstop. They had Dan Gladden in left. Their third baseman was not Gary Gaetti. He was gone by then. But they had Chili Davis, Shane Mack, Kirby Puckett, who made the unbelievable catch. I've actually argued that was probably a more important catch than Mays' catch, because Mays' catch came in the first game. Puckett's catch against Atlanta came in Game 6 when they needed to win the game, down 3-2. Did come earlier in the game, but he still reaches up and pulls it back, really, in center field to rob the Atlanta Brave of a home run and potentially maybe Atlanta going on to like a 3-run lead and winning the championship. You could argue it. I'm not going to say that Mays' catch is not the single greatest event or play in baseball. I am going to say that, but you could probably argue that Kirby Puckett's catch was just as important, if not more important, in terms of circumstances and context than Mays'. And we've talked about Mays' catch here, but that Dan Gladden would score the winning run in the brilliant championship in that unbelievable game. That was October 27th. Went 1-0 in the final. In that game, I will tell you this. I always felt that the outfielder for the Braves, Lonnie Smith, was really criticized unfairly, being basically caught in a double play. It was bases loaded. It was a tough play, and he got nailed. Atlanta hit into a double play in that. Gladden scored the winning run in the 10th inning. He actually went 3 for 5 in that game and was driven in by Kent Herbeck, a long time and really a legend for Minnesota in that game. And I always thought, Lonnie Smith, I got to be honest with you, to be fair, he's one of my favorite players of all time. You realize how many championship teams that kid played for? And he was a good, solid player. Okay, I know they nicknamed him and it was unfair. They called him Skates. Wasn't the greatest of left fielding defensive players. I get all that. He played for the 80, actually, Phillies, so he was on their first championship team. He played on the 82 St. Louis Cardinals that beat the Milwaukee Brewers in a great series, like I just said. Lonnie Smith singles. Terry Pendleton doubles. There's a ground out, unassisted weak, Ron Gant. And then there's an intentional walk to Dave Justice. Now the bases are loaded. This is the top of the 8th. There's an intentional walk given to Dave Justice. And Sid Bream hits into a ground ball double play. It went from first to catcher to first. And don't ask me why, but Lonnie is always, he's always seen as the guy, and I think it's because of the ground out, that he didn't go home on Ron Gant's ground out. And I always thought he was unfairly criticized because you got 2 big hitters coming up. You have Justice and Bream. And if Lonnie Smith was thrown out trying to go home, now you got, ready for this, maybe a runner at third, maybe 1 out with Justice and Bream coming up. But instead, you had 1 out, runners second and third with your 2 heavy hitters. And look what Morris does. Morris intentionally walked the Justice anyway with 2 outs. And I also think this. I think also on the play that Lonnie didn't try to go home on the double by Pendleton because it was a deep drive and they didn't send him. Or he elected not to go. And maybe he was waved home and he either tripped or whatever. Regardless, Smith is always seen as the culprit on that play, and I think it's unfair. It's just one of those circumstances, okay? And it's a quick judgment that you have to make, because if you send the guy home and he gets nailed, everyone's criticizing you. You don't send him home and you don't score, everyone. It's a lose-lose situation for third base coach and the runner at third, okay? But anyway, here's how that inning ended. Bottom of the 10th. Gladden doubles immediately. Knobloch bunts him over on a sacrifice. 2 intentional walks to Puckett and Gene Larkin, who comes up and drives a ball into left field that scores Gladden. and they win the game. And the pitch, just for all you trivia guys out there, it was off Braves pitcher Alejandro Pena. But Hrbek was part of the building of the winning run. All right, let's go to 3 more guys. This is the Detroit Tigers. Cannot believe that the Tigers have not won since 1984. They've been back, been denied a couple of times, but I'm going to promote Evans. He was not the MVP in the league on that 84 Tiger team. In fact, ready for this, that 84 Tiger team, which raced off to a 30-5 record. This was the team that made up that 84 team. You have Trammell and Whitaker, who should both be in the Hall of Fame. They raced off. They scored 5.12 runs a game. And ready for this, they had Lance Parrish, multiple Hall of Famer, had 33, 98, 237, drew 41 walks. Okay, he was the catcher. Dave Bergman was their first baseman, 744, 351, played 120 games. Probably their bread and butter was Lou Whitaker and Trammell, Alan Trammell, who combined, ready for this, for 59 doubles, 6 triples, 27 home runs, and 125 RBIs to go along with 25 steals. And they hit basically together about 303. Whitaker hit 289, Trammell hit 314. Not bad. Whitaker scored 90 runs, Trammell 85. Hojo, who played on the 86 Mets, was 12, 50, and 248. Larry Herndon, right? I believe Johnson, because he was traded for Walt Terrell. He played on the 86 Mets. So he won 2 championships in 3 years. Hojo was 12, 50, and 248. And to all my Met fans out there, I roasted them when they did trade Howard Johnson for Walt Terrell. I always thought Terrell was going to be a really good pitcher. I was wrong. I've been wrong before. Hojo was a pretty good hitter. And then their outfield consisted of Larry Herndon, Chet Lemon, Kirk Gibson, and Darrell Evans was their DH. And, of course, Gibson would go on 3 years later or 4 years later to hit the home run for the Dodgers, which had been their last championship since their recent one when they beat the Astros, 2018. But Evans I brought up because Evans is one of those guys today that would not only be a superstar. He was 1663. He only hit 232. But he led the Tigers in walks with 77. And he had a 353 on-base percentage, which, though it was not the highest, was a type of thing that Evans was known for. Hit home runs, got a lot of walks. When he did play, pretty good defense at first and third. He wound up his career with 414 home runs, hit 248, had a 58.7 WAR. But here's the deal with him. Ready for this? Now, those 77 walks that he drew were not his highest. In fact, he had 6 years where Evans drew over 100 walks. He had another 3 years where he drew 90 walks. And another 2 seasons where he drew over 80 walks. So really, that 84 season was a letdown. He did only play 131 of the 160, so he probably would have had 80, 85 walks anyway. All right? But he has a 248 lifetime batting average. His on-base percentage is 361. Basically, his baseball reference 162 game average would be this: 25, 82, 248, 361 on-base percentage with 97 walks. He would be a darling of all the metric guys today. And if you are a fan of baseball, then you did recognize that this guy was a good, solid player. Problem was he came up with giant teams that were just terrible. Was traded to the giant teams that were just terrible in the 70s. And he played in the aftermath of the great Braves teams. He got into 12 games with the 69 Atlanta team that won the first National League West. But really, he doesn't come into his own until 72 when he starts playing over 100 games for Atlanta. And, of course, he is one of 3 guys on the Atlanta team. He does make the All-Star team in 73 does make the All-Star team in 83, but he is one of 3 Braves who hit 40 home runs in 1973. Dave Johnson and Hank Aaron were the others. 41, 40, and 43, and I think it was Johnson who led the team with 43 home runs over the home run king. And speaking of Johnson, I already mentioned the Mets of 86. Let's talk about his team that he won a championship for, and that is the Baltimore Orioles, who, as a kid, Davey Johnson hit 43 home runs, Aaron had 40, and Evans had 41. Aaron, of course, drives me crazy this year because remember how I always talk, if you're going to use the Earl Weaver method of 3-run home runs, I believe a home run should account or should be hit for every 3 RBIs you get. So 40 and 120. I don't like when it's like 50 and 100, 1 out of 2. That year, Aaron, in one of his low RBI, here I am criticizing one of the greatest, if not the greatest player that I probably ever saw in his prime. Because I saw Mays a little bit too late, and Aaron, of course, lasted a little bit longer, okay? You could argue that I probably saw one of the unbelievable. But anyway, here I'm arguing over a guy, and I'm upset with him because he only had 96 RBIs. And it kind of, for Aaron on that team, in his career, ready for this, drove in 100 runs, and we did a show on this too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And that one year, 1973, spoiled. That was his last year where he had 90 or more RBIs, the great Henry Aaron. But Rick Dempsey on the 83 team, ready for this, spent 24 seasons in the major leagues with an array of teams. Started out with Minnesota, went to the Yankees, went to Baltimore. Played, I didn't realize this, he was the catcher who caught the final out in the 88 World Series for the Dodgers. Didn't realize he played for that Dodger team. Isn't that amazing? But he played in 2 championships, was the MVP of the 83 World Series, and had really great postseasons in his career. Lifetime 240 hitter, hit 54 home runs. He did have 2 solid seasons later on in his career where he had 11 and then 12 home runs. Probably, you could argue, could have made the 85 team, all-star team, but didn't. And the funny thing is, I've just looked. Of all the guys from the all-star era on, 1933 on, Dempsey has played the most seasons without ever making an all-star team. 24. Okay? And I'm not talking about the Eddie Collinses who, played up to, let's say, 1930 or whatever. I'm talking about the guys who, came up with the All-Star game, left with the All-Star game. I think that's only fair. And then our 2 last players, Luis Gonzalez, who was on that 2001 Arizona team that defeated the Yankees in Game 7, had the big bloop single over Jeter's head to win the game for the Diamondbacks. And Billy Hatcher, who had a ton of hits to start the 1990 World Series and really got the Reds off on the right foot. They were the definite underdogs to those great A's teams. And him plus Jose Rio, the MVP, with 2 wins, kind of got revenge or avenged the 1972 loss in 7 games to those great A's teams, Billy Hatcher. He had like 9 hits and 11 at-bats in that series. And then our last guy, of course, the great Tony Gwynn, who got to play in the 84 series and the 2001. Of course, he came up short. A lifelong Padre on a team still waiting to capture their first World Series. Hey, this is Will O'Toole. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll be back next week with another episode of Park Ridge Sports History. Thanks, Howard, for all you do.